fight it with all that is in us. And may God defend the right.
Warning! Warning!
We gotta stop them! They're gonna kill us all!
See how the trouble you've started?
Be they the government, be they industry, be they organized labor, be they anyone, or human beings. Time when the operation of the machine becomes so odious, makes you so sick at heart that you can't take part. You can't even passively take part. And you've got to put your bodies upon the gears and upon the wheels, upon the levers, upon all the apparatus, and you've got to make it stop. And you've got to indicate to the people who run it, to the people who own it, that unless you're free, the machine will be prevented from working at all.
Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com, the #1 listener-supported talk radio station, throwing ourselves upon the gears of the machine. Revolution Radio, where information never sleeps.
You called down the thunder, well now you got it. Right, you tell them I'm coming, and hell's coming with me, you hear? Hell's coming with me!
Revolution Radio.
Mini Ice Age Conversations podcast. It's about observing cycles, sharing insights, and solving problems together by combining historical, climate, food, and economic data so you can make informed decisions as we shift into a new era. Here's what was, this is what's coming. Our world is never going back to 2019, so what will the new era look like? And most importantly, what is immediate that will affect the pocketbook and the outlook into next year so we can all get ready? Thank you for joining. I'm your host, David DuByne.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are on this beautiful blue planet. Could be in the deserts of Mauritania, searching past ancient shorelines, periphery to the eye of Africa. You're looking at the wrong spot. My friends aren't. I've really been into trying to drop away from the news as you know it into, more archaeological news in the sites. And I've suddenly just, this last day to decompress was looking at the Saharan rock art. This cycle that's coming back was referenced by the ancients, leaving stones so we could understand the archaeoastronomy to put a date on when this cycle returns based on the rocks, facing what stars they faced at the time. Wasn't language, wasn't carved on stone. It was made of stone to point you to the stars. That's how important it is. And by the way, tonight, if you're outside in clear skies, look at the Small Dipper, Ursa Minor, Ursa Major, the Big Dipper. You're familiar with that, dominates the sky. Anytime, wherever you are, depending on what time zone, you're looking at the Big Dipper. For us here, it's a good 1 to 2 a.m. and it's up solid where you can see it. You're looking right at the end of the cup of the Big Dipper. And that's where the green comet ZTF is passing closest to Earth tonight over the North Pole as we speak during this broadcast. Then it'll swing down toward the equator over the next day, and then Southern Hemisphere will have a chance to view it. This comet hasn't come back supposedly in 50,000 years once in one orbit. So it just came back after 50,000 years once. And we're in all these changes that we're seeing in our society, and all these ancient civilizations are pointing to this time being drastic and gargantuan change. And what are the chances of a 50,000-year orbital comet swinging through in the neighborhood during the party time? Ransom, sheesh, there's so much to talk about. Seed suppliers burning down, in addition to all the chickens and everything else, orange juice prices all the way up. Getting fined for burning wood in the UK, and then they're taking away the EBT, they're reducing that. So for food assistance in the United States, while food prices are increasing, government's going to decrease the amount of help. That's crazy. Tis the world if you're going to upset it. The cart, I just upset the apple cart, Ransom. How's it? Thanks for joining me tonight. All right. Well, I'll just continue with the monologue in there. Ransom, when you jump on, give us a shout out. Anyway,
No,
how to
I
start?
had myself muted.
Oh, you did? I do that sometimes too, even with my brain.
No, I was saying that's
Just
funny
starting off the
about the,
program fun, you know.
right? Them dropping the nutritional values around everybody on purpose, and then putting out new nutritional guides. I don't know if you saw that, where they had the Lucky Charms and stuff like that that was supposed to be more healthy than meat, eggs, and cheese. These guys are funny.
I'm sorry, Ransom. That was Honey Nut Cheerios that took the leaderboard on that. What used to be food
Oh,
pyramid.
wow. Yeah, if you can believe that. They say it's good for heart attacks. So
I can hear it, but I don't know if I'll believe it. But there's so much stuff out there to hear today. It's what do you believe, right? I don't believe that myself. Dipped in like preservative, wrapped in GMO oats and whatever cereal versus chickens that you raised by yourself. So eggs are worse than that I just described with the GM. We'll talk about GM tonight.
They're General Motors. No, I've been compounding on stuff I've been saying, and then now recently, ironically, I think this is funny because I've been talking a lot for a long time about the kind of effect of devices and flicker rates and all of these other avenues that any system can manipulate a human being. But I'm sitting there watching the World Economic Forum, and they're talking about how they can give you headbuds or earbuds at work, and how they can keep track of what everyone's thinking and how they feel, if they're feeling guilty and all this stuff. And I've been talking about that for a long time, that they have separately admitted that they have machines that can write out, kind of a text of what you're thinking word for word. They have machines that can tell what your emotional state is. They have machines that can show a visual picture of an image that you're thinking about in your head. And I've kind of also, talked about how I think that things are probably 50 years ahead of anything that they admit to the public. And so when I'm watching this World Economic Forum admitting that the new peripherals, basically, so like your wireless earbuds, your cell phone, your tablet, all of these things, they can put off not only a pleasure buzz, manipulating the person that's using it, but they can also tell what you're thinking about. And they showed a whole presentation, which was, kind of just like a movie that I referenced, several times in the past, talking about the subject, which is called Listening, where this guy invents a way for companies to basically tell what you're thinking so that you're not doing corporate espionage. And of course, the government gets a hold of it in that show, and then it becomes the standard where everybody's being listened to by someone else, and they're being listened to someone else, and everybody's listening to each other to make sure no one has, crime think or wrong think or whatever. But now they've outright admitted it, and that's exactly, what I was talking about. That was a reality, and now they've admitted that not only is it a reality, but it's already being used. So the stuff is out there. And how does that fit into kind of what's going on right now? Well, we've talked a lot about controlling the perception of human beings, and kind of the vibrational state that goes along with someone's mood or their goals or the things that they think about all day, and the system of keeping people distracted where they don't know what's going on. It's kind of a fear-based system to force you to, conform to exactly what they have in mind for you as far as being from cradle to grave customer of theirs. And so now you got this World Economic Forum basically saying that any job that you have or anywhere you go or basically all together with technology, that it's going to be turned around on the customer to a point where you can't do anything because they'll know what you are doing, so to speak, wrong, like what you're thinking wrong, if you're feeling wrong. They know all of this stuff, and they're going to merge this now with your social credit score and your money and your health and all of these things. They're streamlining the system, and it kind of blew my mind. But at the same time, it's what I've been saying that they have, and they're just showing this whole thing where you're going to be going to, let's say, the corporate world or anybody that works in government or offices of any kind. You're going to be constantly monitored in there, where they're trying to figure out what you're thinking, if you're doing bad. And they have admitted that this isn't new, because they were putting it out to the audience like, what do you think about a world like this? What do you think, would you be willing to live in that world? And then the lady says, well, what if I told you that we were already doing it and all of these technologies already exist? Which was a straight admission to what I've been saying, that they have already been implementing this system far faster than people realize it's being implemented. And now that you're seeing the government turmoil around the world and the destruction of the food supply is basically what's happening at a grand scale worldwide, so they can change over to the system where you have to buy their products, their food, and to do that, you're going to have their ideas. And plus, the food now we know is a technological aspect that works in combination with the technology, as far as changing your mind, your mood, your mental state. All of this is being affected, by the food that you're eating. And then combine that with the technology that's trying to steer your opinion, your feelings, and your behavior. And we are living in a really, crazy end time scenario. And in the backdrop of this, they have these big, long plans. So we're seeing kind of the short plans coming to fruition, but they have longer plans in the background, which includes creating a biosphere that is completely engineered by the same people that are bringing you all of these other great programs. But they want to engineer a world, and they've already been writing about this world and telling people what it's going to be. And ironically, it seems that they are preparing for an ice age. They have plans on bringing back a mammoth this year, creating a new hybrid species that is more based on the mammoth that they've been finding all these good specimens of mammoths that have died off, and they're mixing with the Indian elephant because that's its closest living relative. It's closer related to that than the African elephant, and plus it grows more hair and stuff like that. So they were able to put these together, and they're going to do this for real. The people that are doing this have plans on making entire herds of this. Now, you got to ask yourself, where does that fit into the world of human beings? But it makes a lot of sense if you realize that they're trying to drive out human beings out of nature into these 15-minute and 5-minute cities, which are basically penitentiaries, with a nice glossy overlook, some VR to keep you occupied. But they are, in fact, prisons where they can dictate your behavior. And then you combine that with the technology I was talking about. But this isn't the only kind of program that they've been having. I've been paying attention to this topic for a while. So all through, including the Americas, Canada, the United States, Mexico, as far as I know, and even in South America, there are different programs to bring back Pleistocene animals or an equivalent animal. Like they don't want to bring back the dire wolf per se, but they do want to reintroduce wolf into different areas of Europe and the Siberian area, and also the United States. There's all these programs going. And it's kind of bizarre when you think about what they're doing with these long-term plans, because we know they have seed vaults, they have genetic vaults, and they're saving all of this stuff. So if you just read the chessboard, it tells you that we're being processed and cold right now. But they're doing it incrementally so that it will have a smoother transition into their new system, in which a world that it's hard to imagine. But think about a completely top-down technological, I got to say, authoritarian system. And it's being decided by artificial intelligence. I'm sure I sent you a video from Paul Joseph Watson where he was pointing out some other things about, the recent revelations about AI and where that's headed. And come to find out, the AI is very skewed, biased, and it's being controlled, of course, by the people that feed in the initial information to kind of give it a personality, so to speak. And they're setting up this entire thing where the fabric of reality is being replaced. And that's why, a lot of people notice right now that there are two sets of facts and two sets of realities when it comes to all of these topics like climate, population, migration, all of these topics that have to do with the system that they're building in the background. And they have these, little, I don't know what you call it. You could even add in all of the AI bots on the social media platforms trying to skew or push a narrative and a opinion into the public. And you can see how they're hurting people into a situation where they don't know what reality is. They're doing this, and at the same time, they're showing us that they are about to kill large numbers of people. If you haven't seen, I've been showing this Chinese spy balloon is kind of blowing up the internet right now. And they're concerned that where it's flying, it seems to be a really low-tech spy balloon from China that's flying over where we probably had ICBMs, in the 50s and 60s. I kind of doubt that any of these places are in the same places now. I'm sure they have secret locations now for launch sites, but the whole world's being set up for a short-term nuclear war within the next 10 years. And even the Pentagon admits that they are indeed, in the background planning for war with China in the next 2 years. They have to do this because that's the other side of Asia. So if you look at the 3 destabilization zones that they've created since 9/11, I'm going to say 9/11 because it's obvious that we occupied and invaded several, like 7 countries, destabilized them. Those people moved. They went to Europe, which is now being destabilized. And China has had a population problem for some time, but they can eat that. And they can eat several disasters and still come out the other end as a functioning, entity as far as having war power and geopolitical power. I don't know. I don't want to be depressing, but all of these ideas that I've talked about, the what ifs and, the it could be and it looks like it is and it sure seems to be. Now, these are all becoming facts that they're admitting to you that, yes, indeed, you live in a world where they plan on reducing the population in 3 different zones. That would be like Southeast Asia in that area of the China Sea, and right there in the middle of Eurasia where, Europe and Asia meet there. And then, of course, in the United States where we're being flooded with deadly narcotics, the likes of which are different than any other era that we've had dealing with the idea of drugs coming across the border. Nothing matches what's going on right now. And then at the same time, they have these remedial arguments that they force on the public, and everybody's fixated on little simple arguments while all of the food has skyrocketed, just as predicted, by the way, on this show. We've talked about this for years now, several years in a row. And now we're here where I can go to the store right now and barely get what I need. Like there's barely any meat. The eggs are expensive. The milk's going expensive. The cheese is expensive. There is no pet food where we're at, or it's hard to find. And then you have, these guys like Fauci and different people talking about that, we're going to have to face getting rid of our pets. And it seems like they're setting up every little situation right after they tell you they're going to do it. What do you think about that? That it's kind of like they pulled the veil away in 2020, ironically, because think about this, and I kind of predicted this, that 2020 would be the year of hindsight, where the occult is no longer, occulted, and it's right out in the view. And they've been doing exactly that for the last 2 years starting on this third year of their plan. And it seems like it's going relatively well for them, according to what I'm looking at.
Control the next ice age reset. The Entry, Chapter 1. That's exactly the book you just wrote there. Because I was more focused on the 400-year cycle, which also had detrimental and very far-reaching effects on every civilization that these grand solar minimums travel through. It's in the heavens. And I just, a couple of days ago, finished the Ancient Apocalypse series with Graham Hancock, and that last episode kind of framed it all in reference. That these different sites around the world, some near the equator, Indonesia, South Africa, Mexico, Europe, Malta, and that China is loaded with ancient antiquity as well. In China, it's called the Beidou Qixing. They're focused on the Big Dipper and what originates out of that area. Sea point for human consciousness. That current flow changes to the star. Obviously, our Earth's affected. But they were putting those monuments and megaliths in place to point to a certain, I wouldn't even say alignment, a certain area of space that had a heavier, more dense debris field to it, and electrically different than we've been in for some 6,000 years. The soup is a little faster charged, if you will, as we're transiting through this part of the solar system for the next couple of thousand, like 4,000 years. We just entered into that new, heavier, like debris field phase, and also Age of Aquarius. Now, you heard that song, Age of Aquarius. So I hear the cymbals. It's 1970s. That we entered that in 2020 with the conjunction. Remember that really, really incredibly close Jupiter-Saturn conjunction where they're only just a sliver off, where they looked like they were almost one connected planet, and that's where people were saying, oh, that was the star that they followed to the manger. The wise men followed that conjunction. And like, nah, it wasn't nearly right now. So if you step back, everything was marking these stars, like where they were. Where was Sirius in the sky? Where were other alignments that we know? But trace the clock back, because when we swing back into different debris areas of space, they know that the society changed. There were so many markers left for us, like Göbekli Tepe is a great one. It was pointing to the stars everywhere. In Malta, they changed the temples every time the degrees would change. So about once every 108 years or so, they would, or even 1,000 years, 1,080 years, they would shift the temple so it still picked up the rising star. So they're wondering why all these temples, why are they oriented in different directions? They're all following the same star from antiquity to show us where we sat in the heavens and when these cataclysms came. And if you see this, when we roll back into this again, y'all in the future need to be aware, because that's the astronomy part of it, archaeoastronomy. But you come now. If you're telling me there's a computer that can read my thoughts, there's going to be a lot of four-letter words for that thing right now. It's a frequency. So if that's a frequency, then Wilhelm Reif or Wilhelm Reif, William in different language names and pronunciations, had a box that you get in, basically made of orgonite. And we'll put different vibration through the copper wire inside the crystals that were lodged in with metal shavings and resin. But you could charge the metal through the current that would then vibrate the crystals at a certain resonance and frequency, and you got in this box, and magic things happened. You're talking about a med bed. That's about as close as you can get. And maybe a couple Tesla wands also. This frequency is changing, and again, you said the change was very visible 2020. I think I agree, because that's the real onset of the grand solar minimum. If you're looking at just the way the sun's behaving, in the beginning, they were going to predict this solar cycle 25 was going to be gigundous, probably maybe one of the biggest ones ever recorded. And it's below solar cycle 24. And it looks like it might even end years early. And when we descend onto that, well, the vibratory field is going to change around us. That's why you kind of summed up the book title of your new book there, Ransom. Control the Next Ice Age, Reset. The entry, let me flick the page for you, page 1. AI assumed responsibility for everybody's thinking. Because I used to chat GPT when I first got on, like the first couple of days. No, it was a couple of weeks. I'd seen a few videos on it in the first days. I was, early adopter, let's say. It gave me very different answers than I think if I went back on it right now and did it again. Because these changes are happening so fast, so quickly. And the robotics too. Ransom and I, we talk about the robotics increase, and we talked about Boston Dynamics way back in the day with the Spot Dog, and eventually they were going to, turn that into different applications. What we thought of these robots being able to do things was they walk, they pick stuff up, they do some, they can lift a human, they can do other things and look human, but not to do backflips and parkour on par with Olympic gold medalists. This is where it is today, publicly. So these changes happening more rapidly than you imagined. Humanity got the vision of what the future of robotics was going to be with the dancing robots and that sort of thing. They sold it as a cute thing. But if you could see the capabilities of these machines, it's just so mind-blowing that it's otherworldly to watch the speed at which the things can spring off. So we think as you would take a running step to start, this is like a giant jumping insect from the start that then moves and catches the ground perfectly, like a jaguar, and at full sprint, and then it's moving. That's some scary stuff. Like you as a human could not outrun that thing, especially if it's able to grab onto the trees and swing around trees, holding on so it can actually get airborne. It did move too fast. So we need to look to the past because we've been here before. Whether you believe in the stories of Atlantis or have gone out to Mauritania, I did a great interview with David Stig Hansen where he traveled out to the Rakat structure, the Eye of Africa. I interviewed him on my channel. If you watch the videos, please be aware there was a delay inside, so we were over talking each other a lot, and sometimes we couldn't hear each other. But I thought the information was so important with these new finds to put it out that I can edit the video later. But the first run that we got to put it out there. The cycles are here, and the past tells us what is about to happen. Because if you go back to the stories of lore, if you don't particularly think Atlantis is a real thing, step back into Asian culture, into Lemuria. It seems as though another one of these types of cultures had arisen 80,000 years ago. And they have about, apparently, so far, and if you go back again to the in the last onset of the Ice Age and into the warm period, the interglacial of one Ice Age ago, that would be at 120,000 years. So if you're rolling up at 40,000 years per, so Lemuria 80,000 years, you add 40,000 years, which brings us into the very dead center of the last interglacial, like 110,000 years before us. That warm period, there's also massive culture because look how much we have accomplished here in this 10,000 years or 12,000 years of warm. Like back then, they were just as anatomically similar as we are. You wouldn't even know the person was different walking on the street today. So then it seems that 40,000 years, and then, the last coming out of the Ice Age, the Cataclysmic, Younger Dryas, and then we are here. That was a remnant of the last one. And if you're telling me we're going back into another Ice Age onsetting, that's pretty interesting because the timing does say large cycle, small cycle. Elites understand the cycles because the ancients left us markers in stone about the cycles looking at stars. and repeating cycles, they're going to control the next ice age reset, cryptocurrency included. So I wonder how Ransom, I wonder how Chat GPT would translate that into a story for another person who wanted to know about cycles in the heavens.
Well, be legit, whatever it told them. It's obviously skewed in a way that's not beneficial to its users. We are kind of, and it's funny. It's a weird that you brought up Neanderthal, because along with the mammoth, by these same people, there are plans to create a small society of another Pleistocene animal that you might be familiar with, Neanderthal man.
No,
they want to bring back.
no.
Yes, they want to bring it back. They want to
that's
give
dangerous.
it a little. Well, weirdly, why would look at the animals that they're picking though to do these experiments? They're all Pleistocene Ice Age animals, and we know that Neanderthal, for example, lived probably 450,000 years or so, alone up there in Europe, doing whatever he was doing, and then just disappeared there at a time kind of like now. So it's bizarre that they have these weird plans of tinkering with DNAs and stuff, but we're way far away. It's not that's just like a little side experiment. So now we have the idea of immortality by being billed, so to speak. So the technology that they're hinting at now, like here's one right here: mutant fish. Scientists inject fish with alligator DNA to create mutant creatures that live a lot longer. And then I'll bring you to this other idea here that they have floating around, if I can find it.
Be gentle, Ransom, with the family-friendly advertisers.
Oh yeah, no, it's friendly. This is all, they're trying to push this idea of sci-fi here. If I can find the article, I have so many open.
Okay, family-friendly. Anyway, family-friendly program.
The article is talking about the experiments in Japan that they have found out that they can reverse the aging on different organ sets. So that means your eyes, maybe your lungs, your liver, targeted areas in your body so far in the experiments. And the question has arose now: has the first person that will live to 150 years already been born? And the reason that they're talking about this is because, of course, whenever they use a technology, they're going to convert it to something else. Now, there's a lot of people in the world that could probably afford to do this type of technology that they're now coming up with. But when you put that in conjunction of what's going on right now, massive population reduction, the idea starts to emerge that part of their concept for a new world are these little tiny societies of people that have long lives with little or no children. And the children that they do have will be gene edited and used CRISPR technology, the same technology that they're trying to bring the Neanderthal and the mammoth back with. They can also do that to human beings, meaning they can take out any kind of genetic expression that the state doesn't like. Now, they put out this idea of baby factories too, which is a real company that has plans on doing this. And you're wondering, well, that's weird. Why would we need baby factories? But then you realize that most of the rest of Western world is going sterile or infertile and having problems. Now, one of the number one businesses that are opening up, if you live in any urban area like Los Angeles, or if you live on the East Coast of DC or Miami, you might notice that there's been a lot of commercials for reproductive health services, and not the bad kind, the kind, well, I don't know, I guess that's up to you to decide, but the kind that helps people have children. And what they do is, they have all of these different techniques that they're trying to help couples have children that can't have children on their own. Which leads you to the question, well, why are there so many people that can't have children? Well, that goes into, some stuff we probably can't talk about because they might, delete one of your videos like they did a couple of shows back, probably for nothing we said that's not real.
Family friendly there, Ransom. Yeah, they deleted a video and gave me a strike. Family friendly show here.
Yeah, so I won't say nothing about that, but it is obvious that it's not a science fiction idea anymore, that we can create and design civilization. So who are the people doing this? Well, they're the transhuman movement. They're the technocratic type people. But when they're telling you that they can now reverse age, do you think they'll be sharing that with a massive population? That just doesn't make sense. Now, they might share it with a smaller population. And recently I sent you an article, or it wasn't an article, it's a page out of a book talking about kind of the plans forward. And it was written in 1996, I believe. But it talked about how what's going on right now would exactly happen until they reduce the population of the world to where China was allowed to have their own 500 million, and the rest of the planet would be reduced down to 500 million as well, because this is a lot easier managed. Now, think about this concept if everything is being reset. And I want to show you some articles right here in a row that show you that the life that we've been living of being able to use technology to order whatever we need, or to live easy and, maybe get around the systems of grocery stores and other stuff and order your food, that's coming to an end. And I remember a while back you said something about, whenever you see that the shippers are reducing their numbers and the people like Amazon and stuff are having issues, that's when you'll know that things are teetering to the end of economic collapse, which, of course, we would have economic collapse if China and the United States go to war, because we've interlaced our economy so much that we kind of need each other, but not the governments. So don't get me wrong. I'm not talking about the military industrial complex or the government continuity of government entities. I'm talking about the public. The public are the people that will be crushed by this. So here it is. Amazon reports almost no growth, no profit. Here we go. We got Apple. Sales dropped 5%. That doesn't sound like a big deal. But when you see this whole pattern, Google parent Alphabet posts drop in ad revenue amid slowdown, meaning people aren't paying attention. Lackluster earning reports for big tech's golden age is fading. So they're telling you to your face that things are getting bad and that the tech giants are receding, and every other economic marker that you can look at is shrinking. Short on cash, more Americans tap their 401s for savings and emergencies. Well, why are they having savings and emergencies? Well, it might be because everything is shutting down. And then we see, to circle back around what's going on, the technology I was talking about. See, they're putting it off in a friendly way to the millions of people that don't pay attention to these Davos and World Economic Forum people. Here's a new app. Smartphone app can identify deadly stroke as it's happening. The 3 signs you must never ignore. And on and on and on. There's just all of these new things that are basically tech AI deciding what you're going to be doing and how you're going to be doing it. And then at the same time, they're pushing this idea of a planet that's burning up while we see the coldest wind chills in decades thrash through New England. I believe that it's about to get colder. And here's this article, and this is the one that I was talking about. Has the first person to live to be 150 years been born? And they talk about possibly because they have this new DNA mutating technology that can reverse aging in certain spots of the body, and they can target organs or different stuff. So what this means is that certain people with the right resources at the top end of the technocratic system may be around a lot longer than you think. And, talking about term limits with the government, think about people that have the billions just surviving multiple generations while everybody else life shortens because of bad health, lack of food, and the technocracy of a 2-class system that's emerging, kind of like an ant colony. And that's that feudalist type communist system that we've been talking about. It's a communist capitalist system. In the way that it's capitalist is the fact that the party comes up with specific products that you have to buy. You have to buy them to live. They're the ones going to be the only ones with the food because they're going to be growing it in factories instead of letting you raise it in the field.
Yeah, we've talked about this before. Actually, you're the one I think coined the term gravitational births, where, lower magnetic field on the planet from a sun perhaps going into a 400-year low in solar activity. The people born in that low magnetic field would live to be the longest in the last 400 years. Like right now, most children born now for the next 10 years or so are going to have the longest lifespans of anybody in the last multi-centuries. So if you understood that as the rulers of the planet, and that's when you tried to focus your childbearing was during low solar activity, low magnetic field, Earth's magnetic field, at that point to plan the births into that low magnetic field to extend the lifetime of the human compared to the rest of everybody else born at different solar cycles, that would be a much longer generation to rule the planet. So how many generations would it take if you lived average 15 years longer, 20 years longer than the average person because you're born at a certain magnetic field, low strength, every 11 or 22 years, you have a chance. If you could time that, even if it was 10 years and your family lineage lived 10 years on average longer than every other family or average person on the planet, your family would have a huge advantage of age to pass it on. So think about that. 10 generations, you've already gained a full generation above. So when you say 50 years in advance of the technologies, could it be the same? Yep, could be. Everything is changing. We understand that. This GMO thing, I don't know how it really fits in. The GMO call for, okay, so most crops in the United States are genetically modified, Roundup Ready. I mean, there's a million names for them, from the soybeans to the cotton. The corn, obviously, is the biggest one. The wheat, everything. There's even GM barley now and GM sorghum. All of it. So you think I might be eating sorghum, an ancient grain, millet, sorghum, amaranth, buckwheat. I got a GM for it. I got a GM variety for it. Every single one of those. Chickens, GM, no worries. So Mexico says, we're not going to buy any more genetically modified corn from the United States, or the proposal is being voted on. It's making the news headlines and waves around the planet because if you are looking for change, if something like this were to happen in a stoppage during the spring, and I'm going to continue from a couple programs ago, of those who understand, the high pressure dome set up over the West had also in motion over the last year and a half dried out the Mississippi to the driest it had been in 200 years. Well, the grain shuttles couldn't transport up and down the river, so they loaded all that grain onto the sides of the Mississippi because all the storage facilities were full. There was just nowhere to take it, and also the grain shuttles, or the grain barges, couldn't pass in areas, and they still can't in some areas. And it's gone now to winter and low water in winter and ice and that sort of thing. So there's a huge amount of grain stacked up and down the Mississippi. But if Mexico calls for a corn boycott in the United States, all that's going to go to waste and rot. And the previous episodes, I was saying, if they were able to put a high pressure dome in to create a drought for a year and a half on the Mississippi, you could reverse that and cause a massive, biggest flood in 200 years to come down and, wash away all those stored grains on the side of the banks. Or you can do the inverse here, where Mexico says no corn, and then that'll have no value. It's like, we'll just pour it into the river, let it rot there, whatever. There'll be no value for it. That would absolutely be so catastrophic for the United States. If you could not sell the corn outside the U.S., especially in Mexico, America's biggest buyer, that would collapse our economy at the commodity side, where everything begins. It would be stagflation in a deflationary stagflation. It would just keep going down, and it would hold the price and go down again and hold that price, and nobody, geez. Imagine sitting on mountains of produce that used to have billions of dollars of value and it turns to zero. Not because it's there, it's a physical thing, it's there. But the desire for it is zero, so it is equal to zero. If you have 100 million tons laying there, yeah, somebody else might try to come and swoop it up like China. But still, to get that much volume outbound, what you usually run by rail, that's not even comparison. Like how much you can run on a rail versus take on a ship. Nonstop rails, there's not nonstop ships. And if they are, they're smaller than what a mile-long rail car, break bar, full carriage cars could pull in there. So what is going on with the food supply? Because these large generations, longer-lived generations, they do want to continue to rule the planet. So I'm wondering, gold will still have its value, silver. And he targeted those 3 areas around the world that were going to go into some sort of liquidation. And I'll tell you a story. I want to take you back to post-World War I. Weimar Republic. So when you think of the classic full-on societal collapse, economic collapse, monetary collapse, everything collapsed into the collapse of the collapse, that would be it. But it was only in a single nation. The borders around it weren't affected. It was the nation itself in Germany and Austria also, both. They went into these crazy hyperinflationary, but all the other countries were fully financially sound, but they were using a gold-backed system. They were using gold, silver. Go back into the 1910s, 1920s. So as the economy was completely collapsing, and I have a couple figures for you here, to repair the window on your house cost more than the initial price of your house. Just to repair the window would cost you more than buying a house. To get a pair of shoestrings, previously you could have got 40 pairs of shoes for the same amount of trade value that you could have got for 1 pair of shoestrings. That's how much the price is hyperinflated. Of their own devalued money. Everybody's throwing the money back in the country. They didn't have any way to use it except to use it. Nothing else. Gold, silver, or the crappy money. The hotels were full, so chock-a-block. People were renting out their houses like Airbnb to allow the tourists to come in with hands full of gold coins and buy all the artwork and the antique furniture. And we're talking back then in the 19-teens, early 1920s, 1920, 21, 22, 23. Flush. The gold and the silver were able to purchase all of that. They were buying, and there was one story of, it was 10 ounces of gold, bought an entire city block, including all the buildings on the block, for 10 ounces of gold. So there was really gold fever. People were rushing in, to go spend all their silver and gold coins as fast as they could to purchase anything. So you got to think about it, as this reset moves through, what is going to hold the value? Because, Ransom, throw me there, what do you think is going to move through the Ice Age reset here? And it's not going to be an Ice Age immediately. It's going to take some onset time. I will say there'll be a blocking pattern first that will not move. So if you thought the blocking pattern over the Western United States that caused a massive drought over the last 2 years, if you thought that was big, okay, block that and leave it locked there for 100 years and see what kind of new ecosystems form around it. Leave that same high blocking pattern in place for 1,000 years and make it in a snow area. And that snow will never stop. The movement from A to B. What tech, Ransom, do you think is going to be transferred through the monetary wealth? If we're moving to a full crypto system, a central bank digital currency, digital, there's always going to be cash in the wild. I heard Lynette Zhang say there's always going to be cash in the wild. So, you're going to eventually sometime change your silver or gold to interact with the system. But once you put the cash back in the system, it's going to digitize and you'll never get the physical back. But they're going to wait a minute for all the wild cash to come in, cash in the wild. So I don't know, you have a pretty good glimpse of the future. Walk me through what kind of tech is going to survive this. Because if you can already place yourself being a master of that tech or understanding it or understanding the pitfalls of it, you'd have a much better chance of getting through 2030 after all these different things we see move around the planet. Because if they're going to stop the corn across the United States, that is absolutely going to send us into a spiraling depression. So fast, too. This next year, they won't even want to plant. And then when they don't want to plant, then the food price is going to skyrocket like unbelievable. It'll be like the Great Depression where they burn corn because there's oil in it and they can actually get heat from it. People always thought, look at those potbelly stoves. They were actually burning field corn after it dried because it was only 10% moisture and had all the oils in it and the cob and everything. And they actually used it for firewood because, that's crazy. And will we see times like that again? I don't know, but it's a strange world. Neanderthal, you need Neanderthal manipulator.
Well, here's an idea for you. Does it actually have to be a real physical, ice age? Or if the reset happens and there's these giant no-go zones because either they say there's a war happening or the after effects of the war, or they're protecting the environment, or, you can't go into where the mammoths and the Neanderthals, we set aside that. Any number of, these ideas is basically an ice age. And I say that because basically everybody would be compartmentalized in these little spots across the globe in this new situation. So it doesn't have to be an actual ice age to set it up in the format of the way people were living in the ice age. And then you were talking about what tech would go through. Well, I think, even if you went back to ancient times and you gave someone a little chip in their arm and they told them, you need this and you can come to the city and you can buy your bread and you can trade your stuff and you can do whatever. Even those people would come to realize that, oh, okay, that's how that works. And it wouldn't be hard to get a primitive people to use that, not even knowing how it works. So we could be looking at an artificial type ice age. And that's kind of the scenario they're setting up. But here's a weird idea that you just gave me. That's another indication that things would be being reset fast. If you look back through history, you notice that whenever things are resetting, like, say, the Library of Alexandria, or you could go to World War II, they took and hid all of the famous artwork and the old artwork, and it all went back into private possessions and hidden by entities. Now, think about what's going on recently with the Green Movement, where all of them keep attacking these priceless art pieces. Now, wouldn't it be weird if they just took all of those art pieces and took them and put them in private hands so that no one could destroy them anymore? I don't know. That's kind of another indication. I mean, just think about, well, we couldn't leave the artwork out because everybody was attacking it. So we have to hide it to preserve it for humanity, but not in the reach of humans. And that's kind of already happened several times. I think we're in the time right now that we don't realize it. But if you go back to the ancient people and they talk about their ancient past, about how there was these people with powers and technologies, and they taught us how to do that. It might not be that far-fetched that in about 200 years, some people might pop out of some dumbs, and then these new, stories of like Quetzalcoatl and different people show up to the people that have lost books, technology, and other stuff. Only thing that would survive through a complete grid shutdown, which they're experiencing in Texas right now, by the way, is books, if they could last. But we know books don't last that long. So it would be oral traditions that would be the only thing that passed down, while there's a whole technocratic system that would be the new teachers. And unfortunately, that seems like a very possible scenario. It's a whole Quetzalcoatl or Kukulkan situation, or Viracocha, or any other number of ancient, societies that had a teacher just show up with tech and show them how to build pyramids or whatever it was. And it seems like that, it wouldn't be that hard for a couple more generations to be in that same situation, which would give the elite the total upper hand on telling people what reality is, especially after saving these technologies that can change the perception of reality itself.
Yeah, so our perception of robots and robotics right now is what you see as a standard-sized human, standing up, that we're, putting skin on it, like skin, prosthetics, etc. But imagine if the giants of old that were talked about were nothing more than 30-foot tall robots with human-looking skin on them. That would explain how they were able to build all these giant temples within days and never stop, no stop, no stop. But again, that's just ancient legend. But the tech that could have been saved through many a reset, if it were, and let's say 100,000 years advanced, I think we would see giants emerge that would be, skin covered, so you wouldn't. It'd be a lot scarier having a metal thing emerge out of the ground to teach you and talk to you than a feathered, being coming out, flowing robe, giant, massive feathers cruising across the ocean. Hello, let's talk some maths. Let me start a fire for you right here. That's a little bit easier. So I'm not sure where we go with that. But that baby factory thing was crazy you're talking about. Hope they have a jingly ad with that. We're going to be coming on the break here in just a minute. But really soak in the world around you. And, I want to talk about David Stig Hansen's trip out to the Sahel and the Eye of Africa, or known as the Rikat structure. A little bit about what we chatted. And I thought it was real fascinating that there's so many areas in southern Libya, Chad, these areas that still have vast ancient cities that are just, a little tourist destination, but it was a mile wide city, a rectangular mile by 3/4 of a mile by a mile, 3 miles around on the wall in the city, just abandoned in the desert, like all over the place. This is our prehistory. As our earth turned over. Back a couple minutes, go to break. How would you protect yourself?
You're listening to Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com, and we'll be right back after this message.
I wanted to talk about hand-cranked radios for just a second because I think they're incredibly important. I myself, I did hours and hours of research on the best hand-cranked radio that could also be a phone charger, emergency light, be able to listen to radio stations, the NOAA weather station in case something happened and you were power out, you could still know what the weather was coming. I personally own this one, the Eaton Red Cross FRX3. It's all hand cranked and there's a small solar panel on top of it. So it's multiple options for recharging, including plug-in. So if something were to happen, hand cranking is the next best option. I would love solar, but it might be a cloudy day. You might be inside a house, but you're going to have to create the power somehow. You hand crank it and ergonomically, it slides right in like a book on a bookshelf. I can't believe how long the battery charge lasts on this thing. Even if you leave it up somewhere, like I say, on a bookshelf or in a closet for 6 months, it still has almost a full charge after that period of time.
These crank lights and radios are a must-have. The fact is, if you live anywhere where there's going to be weather, you're going to want to know what's going on. You're going to want to be able to see. And not only that, you're going to want to be able to charge your devices so that you can communicate if the power is out. This is something that you should have if you live anywhere where there's tornadoes, hurricanes, blizzards, etc. It's not whether or not the power is going to go out. It's just when, that's going to happen. So these are something that you should have handy with you in your car and your backpack. 2 or 3 of them actually would be a good thing to have in several places so that that you're going to be able to have light. You're going to have information and maybe communication. Those are 3 main things that you need. And plus, it's cool. You can listen to the radio, which makes the time go by if you're waiting for anything, waiting for the power to come back on. You're going to want to keep your mind occupied, and you're going to want to be able to see what you're doing and also be able to communicate if there is the ability to communicate. And you don't want your devices to be dead when that happens.
In an emergency, you would know where people were moving to. For example, out here in East Tennessee, we have massive wildfires sometimes, and they'll be on the radio broadcasting exactly where the fires are moving. And this is off of what you consider like your AM, FM channels that you would get on your car radio. It depends on which frequency that they're using for that, but they will absolutely tell you where emergency resources are stationed. So if you have to abandon your car, you could be able to get to another place as long as you know the roads, or you might have a map. You'll be able to get to some help or main roads where there's emergency vehicles transiting up and down there. Have this on the go, that it's be able to put it in your hand and still listen to something. It's very lightweight as well. What happens with your communications or even listening to something to be able to understand what's going on in the environment around you? And that's the key to surviving. And Ransom, I know you said this a few times, is understanding your environment, being able to manipulate your environment, and being able to move through that environment to get yourself to safety, to reassess the situation.
Not only that, this is one of the cheapest ways to have insurance so that, you know, whatever happens, if you're on the move, if you have to grab your bag and go, or if you're just at home trapped when the power's out, not only do you know what's going on, but you know if the situation is going to worsen. Imagine all those people that were in several of the different hurricanes that we've had the last couple of years where the power was out. There were a lot of people that didn't know that was coming, and unfortunately they're no longer with us. But I'm sure that people that were prepared and had some radio, they knew where to go, they knew where the relief aid was going to be, they knew which directions the storms were coming, and they knew which directions the water was coming from. So this is a must-have for anybody that wants to know what's going on, and also just having the light.
And you can click on the link in the description box below. And remember, any purchase that you make with the links, whether it be through the podcast in the description box or on the videos across the multiple platforms after we stream, helps us keep this type of information and this show on air so we can continue to bring information and share this information so then you can share with others. This is truly how it's going to be, is sharing of information, forming communities, and have others that also have some of the same information so we can work as a group versus being on your own alone. That's going to make a huge world of difference, sharing information in communities.
If you wanted to start prepping and taking it serious to get some of these very inexpensive tools that are necessities, why not be prepared for what might happen? Click some of the links, help yourself.
If you appreciate this type of information, click on that link in the description box below. Support our broadcast, our continued mission of bringing you information that can enhance our lives, make our lives more comfortable as we move through this transition.
And welcome back to the second hour of Mini Ice Age Conversations. Didn't know we were off the break there. Didn't hear that end. Okay. Second hour, thank you for sticking around with us. Ransom, Godwin, and myself talking about, these magnetic berths and different magnetic fields moving forward here into some known period of time that was going to shift society anyway. And I go to estate sales sometimes, and I buy lithographs and old books and historical books or any books of the day. I like to go those like reliable, let's say encyclopedias, go back to the early 1900s. So I like to read about history from those books that were printed in, say, 1913, 1899, 1913, 1915, 1921, something like this. Now even 1930s. You might think those books are super expensive, like rare and thing. They're not. They're everywhere. Just go to an estate sale and you'll be surprised at how many really old books you can pick up there. And if you don't, just tell the people that are working, hey, I'm interested in some of these more ancient books or older books. And you get on a list, and every time they get books at an estate sale that they're going to sell, they'll ask you, are you looking for this kind and that kind? And they'll for sure let you see them if you're going to actually buy something. A few of the estate sales, they open up a few days early, and if you've been on their list and they know you need to come in, you're a regular buyer, you just don't go in. You're always looking in their stores to see what they have of ancient or of our older societies, treasures. That's one, because the information on those pages from the early 1900s tells about the history of the late 1800s, mid 1800s, and early 1800s from the perspective of that time, just 100 years ago. So think about what we think about the 1920s, or even think about the turn of the 19th century. Okay, 1899, and you're changing over to the year 1900. Tell me about the parties and the festivities and what world was happening at that time. What kind, was it a prosperous society? Did they have a financial class? Tell me about the world of 1910, or excuse me, 1901, 1900, 1899, or even 1910, all good. From our perspective today, it's very different than what you might think the perspective was when you start reading some of these encyclopedias about the countries. And it's good to get some older books like that. we're delving into the past a little bit, and I'm just rambling. So, welcome back to the second hour here. Free speech, if you appreciate that, consider keeping Freedom Slips right here. Revolution Radio, Studio A, on air every single Thursday night, 10 p.m. to midnight. Studio A, if you value that, hop on the website, consider a donation, because the more we can communicate during these times, the better off we're all going to be. So, Ransom, hop on in. I know you watched the premiere with David Stig Hansen when he went out to the Rakat structure there. I know we were over talking each other because of some setting I had in the Zoom was like 2 different audio layers on there. But what do you think of the information about timelines going back? And truly, the Rakat structure is one thing, but there's so many ruins out there, so much vast history just buried in the sands across the Sahara. It's staggering how much we don't know about how much of a civilization was there.
Yeah, that was a pretty trippy conversation. That's really cool that he got to go out there. I myself am not a fan of the theory of this being Atlantis myself, but that doesn't mean that it's not lots of ancient civilization stuff going on around it. And the reason I say that is because we know that the entire Sahara Desert is uncovering massive amounts of pyramids and cities. And when you think about, not just Africa, but other places, we keep digging up more and more stuff. The Yucatan Peninsula, for example, first they tried to give this idea of, this mysterious group of natives that made a couple of stone monuments, maybe a pyramid. Then, there's a bigger city here where they uncovered it. And then now, fast forward to now, we know that because of LIDAR, not only in the south and Guatemala and Belize and down in there, but all the way up to the northern side where they didn't classically think that Mayans were at originally in these big cities. We now know the entire Yucatan Peninsula and the area all the way over to Mexico City and down, who knows how far into the jungle through Central America, was massive amounts, millions and millions and millions of people now. We know that there was major cities all through that now. And they're finding more like daily. And when you look at that culture, that was a pretty trippy culture because they had this whole timeline written about it. And that's all being turned over on its head now because, they're finding stuff in the northern part of the Yucatan Peninsula that's older, by probably 1,000 years than they even thought the Mayan moved up in there. And then, I personally got to go see a couple of Mayan cities recently, and I did notice specific differences in the building styles. So I'm pretty sure that the Maya came across abandoned cities of someone else before them. They throw around the name Olmec, but that's just a kind of made up name that they use. We have no idea who the people were, but whoever they were, they could finally cut stone stuff, and they had the history of 52,000 years of the precession of the equinox knowledge. But you had this guy on about the Rakat structure, which is really it's one of the most bizarre features of Earth, and there's all these, people that believe in the Anunnaki and stuff, and they have the stories of the false mountains that they made, the pyramids and stuff. A lot of people think that was actually the Anunnaki way before the dynastic Egyptians came around, and then there's other people that just think it was some impressive human civilization. But what we find out is the entire belt, probably to what we call the equator in the Ice Age times, was most likely covered all the way around the world with massive cities. So the idea that this might be Atlantis or some other place is not that far-fetched as far as that goes. I'm not a proponent, actually, that this is Atlantis. I think it's probably more than the Azores, but there's definitely a lot of ancient building and artifacts that are just covered by this giant desert that didn't even exist not too long ago as far as humans go in the geologic past. We know this whole area was jungle, and there's no argument that this is probably the best case proof for a giant massive tsunami that covered the entire Middle East, the Mediterranean, and dumped out into the Atlantic Ocean. I mean, you could just see it from space that a giant flood came through this whole area. And matter of fact, I don't remember how long ago, but you were pointing out some similar areas in China that look just like this, where you could tell a massive amount of water washed over the landscape.
Yeah, those areas were the Tarim Basin. And if we go times past, if you think about silk trading routes going through that area, they skirted the desert there because, yes, it was much wetter than it was now. It was a veritable forest in there, grasslands, savanna, fruit, beekeeping, orchard crops, everything was in there. That whole area, not exactly in the center. It was still sort of a wild place in the center, but the caravans went up to the north and the south, and that's where you have some of the largest oases from the time of that caravan going out through Kashgar and going west into what's that? Kyrgyzstan, and then over to Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan. You know, then they split off and they went into different areas, culminating over in Istanbul. But that area through there also shows massive, what you would consider sand deposits, sand dunes left by massive floodwaters screeching over that. So, if you look at some of the more ancient tales, the Earth actually did tilt on itself. That's why they have the ecliptic. So somehow the magnetic field of the mantle and the magnetic field of the crust, different magnetic positive, negative. There was no magnetic field to align to, so it just didn't matter. So there was no magnetic field. Nothing coupled. It just kind of moved. And then suddenly the magnetic field started again, and whoosh, the crust and the mantle are a different charge again, and they lock in place. Now that has been time immemorial stories. So when looking at these sand dunes left, you can kind of get an indication on which direction the floodwaters rushed over. How much did it scour through that's noticeable that we just think is canyons? Oh, it's just a flat land. It's just bad land. It's just something. Never an explanation behind it. It's always just, just a natural feature. Don't question it. Don't question how it built itself or the building process into that. Just, it is what it is. When you look at some of these things from the satellite, like Stig did, and then he went out there, he got David Stig Hansen, and took a look out there to actually see what was on satellite imagery. And, what looks like a man-made feature, maybe isn't. Maybe the canals were built because I saw some, uniform stones that were giant in size, all up and down a mile stretch there, like we would do today. We put giant stones up and down a canal. They don't go out there and actually get into the canals and see what is this thing. They don't even admit it's a canal. But he's out there jumping at these things. That crazy. But yeah, the world we know is a little bit different than the world we've been told about. Even the whole thing about China moving out through the Tarim Basin, this sort of thing. Really, is it 600 years prior that area was forested in the bone driest desert right now, that they give you the indication that it's been like that for thousands of years, right? If I say the Gobi Desert, what would you say? Like the Gobi, how long do you think the Gobi Desert would have been bone dry as it's been like it is now? Couple thousand years? Not 6,000 or whatever it seems to be. 600 years ago? It was at the end of, that started to dry out. So it took them, approximately from, 1,400 years ago to 600. So it's about 500-600 year process, a little bit longer to dry out and it could have been as quickly as 400 years. But verdant, I wouldn't say super gigantic oak forest where a squirrel could run through the oak leaves and never touch the ground on the Tarim Basin. Not that dense, but still tree covered enough to have orchards and wine growing and wheat production and all these things that are just nigh impossible to do there. Today it's too dry. So the stories and legends that were passed down through those areas, they talk about a giant wave rushing over there and leaving all those sand dunes the way they were. And then you see them across where Mauritania. And then if you look further south down into, what's that, the Kalahari canals, down in Namibia and Botswana, there where the Okavango Delta empties out. If you go north of the Okavango Delta, travel north, and you're going to look to the west, off to the seaside. You're going north and then look to the west for the seaside. You're going to see a bunch of parallel, I mean, they call them the Kalahari canals for a reason. They're so parallel, they're all equidistant between each other by the thousands going across through what we know as desert today, but they're so uniform they could only be sculpted by human hands or some mathematical precision. It's just nature could not do that. Electricity could, targeted, but just the way you look at it as a natural erosion pattern, it's a hard sell, really is, especially when you know that there were more vast cultures that encompassed the planet, and the level of technology was orders of magnitude above where we sit today as a given. That's where we would be at. So since I was talking there, I pulled up this map here of the Talamancan, or the Tarim Basin area. It ran through the Gobi Desert at Jaime, and turned back from so that was the Gobi Desert interconnection there. Oh, it was Jaime, yeah, Udamuchi, that's the big one that you hear about. And north and to the little west of Udamuchi, and you come into the Taishan Mountains. They're putting the largest hydroelectric dam in China in one of the driest places in China. Now, it started to fill up, but it filled up years in advance of where it is. So the weather patterns have already changed. The Chinese already gamed it out, put a hydroelectric dam, one of the driest places on the planet, like 5 years in advance of the weather and the rains changing. And now it's changed so much that it filled the dam years. Like I say, it was about 3 years or so in advance of when they thought it would even get to generation capacity. But this thing's up at full where they got to run it off through their floodgates to try to get it. That's crazy. Like, people know these cycles. They know the cycles. It's nothing new. If you knew where the same places would set up again, to be. So the world's obviously shifting. Weather patterns, cloud cells, jet streams are moving into new locations. New monsoon patterns are forming. If you knew where the new monsoon patterns would form first and two, you would set yourself up there. Governments, investors, whatever it is, you would jump onto that location first. So imagine if the old Silk Road area became green again through the Tarim Basin area out to Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan. And then think about if that area also in the Sahel area where the Rakat structure is, all the way across there, that band starts to get really wet really fast again with the North African monsoon shifting. Like, those areas used to have vast estuaries. Was that Muammar Gaddafi was pumping water from the Nubian sandstone aquifer underground, because just in their area, under Libya, they had something like 30,000 cubic kilometers of water reserves. And over that area, as you start to go from Egypt through Libya over into Morocco and Algeria, it comes into hundreds of thousands of cubic kilometers of water now in what's called the Nubian sandstone aquifer, and it replenishes itself from the Atlantic Ocean over off of Mauritania and in the Mediterranean Sea. It replenishes itself through the rock, where you get this median zone where it's been filtered for 300 miles through the bedrock sandstone porous rock there to clean itself, got all the salt out, and then it turns into fresh water on a never-ending replenishing cycle. It's like the largest desalinator on the planet, but it's an entire part of the crust that works as the desalinator. Tapping that, and he was pumping, and it built incredible irrigation networks of underground pipes that were just massive 40-foot circumference, or no, it was a 40-foot diameter pipes to run water to try to re-irrigate what was previously estuaries down in Chad, southern ends of Libya, really super dry areas that would once, and his whole plan was to bring them back to agricultural abundance. He knew it also. He knew the pattern would change enough that if he coupled underground water resources with the changes in the above ground precipitation, you would have a huge, massive, gigantic head start on your agriculture because you'd already planned, so it met at the exact perfect time. Like they were already well into millions of acres of production of grains in the desert by the same irrigation. They were predicted to go 10x and then 10x again and have one of the largest growing areas on the planet, double rotation crop in that. It would have been a multi-country area where these estuaries previously had been in the African megalakes. Which brings me back to David Stig-Hansen's talk from yesterday, African megalakes. You know, a lot of these drainage things that people talk about from the ancient cultures, yeah, sea levels were higher, like, 400 feet higher than they are, or were. They use sea level relapse 400 feet. So ancient societies would set up at that sea level area and then whoosh, and then the waters rise 400 feet. What are you looking for? You're on the wrong shoreline. These areas are known again. See, this is the thing. I've done many a presentation. I'm going to try to sum it up and quit rambling here. Over the last, say, 5 years, I've been invited to go speak at different conferences about the same thing. And one time I would just do an explanation of what a grand solar minimum is, how the electromagnetic fields on the planet changing, cloud cells and jet streams moving to different places, precipitation, and the electrical effects with increased red sprites, blue jets, and red elves, halo elves at the upper atmosphere and the ionosphere at 100 miles. And I would do that. I would show the amplification of, hey, this was 2017, look at the one in 2021. It's, massively bigger. But wow. So I'd really done a lot of research on each of these individual areas, because as a global total, if you're telling me that the Chinese put the largest hydroelectric dam in the driest place in their country and it's filling up, okay, they understand the Tarim Basin is going to refill. It'll be a new bountiful crop grow zone. But you're telling me that they put the largest hydroelectric dam in Africa, in Ethiopia, called the New Renaissance Dam, in the driest place in Africa, and it filled up years early because the cyclone pattern's different. Who would have known that pattern? World Bank paid for it. Filled up years early, already producing electricity. So they need the electricity to bring out the grow zone there. Cyclone patterns change so much in that area based on new flows of the atmosphere that there are lakes now in some of the driest regions of Saudi Arabia, Yemen, and Oman. But prior, let's go back in history a little bit, along the frankincense route through the Red Sea there up to Turkey, there was an area called the Marib Dam, 800 AD. This thing was approximately 16 to 24 feet tall, depending on which gully it was blocking. And it stretched for hundreds of square miles in Yemen, in the driest place. Because if you go to, let's see, you're going to find that Horn of Africa there. You're going to find the Red Sea right on the corner there, the port of everybody's interest. Just go behind that mountain range. It's a huge, giant basin, just like Tarim Basin, or just like some of these basins we see maybe off of the Rakat structure. That was totally full of water, and that was a dam that they used to irrigate the frankincense trees with. That's how they got such massive frankincense production. And the Aksum kingdom rose to supremacy around 500 AD after the Romans collapsed. The coinage was the purest of the day, so everybody instantly adopted the Aksum new gold coin measures because the Romans had been debasing their currency and less silver, less copper in their coins, so nobody trusted it anymore, so they moved to a new monetary system in that region based on frankincense. So it was a frankincense bank currency, basically. Gold and frankincense, but they made the measure so pure, the Aksum did that on purpose to make the measure so pure that it was the most valued and most desired coin anywhere, as far as we know, the known world at that time, stretching through all of Africa, all of Asia, and all of Europe, and all of Africa. These are the kind of changes that are back again, and the same people understand, because where I'm telling you where they exited out the Aksum with the most precise coinage on the planet after the Romans that set the new standard, that dam, the new Renaissance dam, is right there. Right there. You can't tell me it's a stone's throw, literally a stone's throw from all of this culture, and all you have to do is watch the wetting and the re-wetting process. So Ransom, you talked about controlling the next ice age entry and the entry into it. You know, we are definitely at a point where we have the longest interglacial ever recorded in the last like 3.5 million years. This is the longest one ever. So the entry moving in, you're going to see a lot of changes going toward the cooler side indefinitely here. So how long do you think the onset of these changes would be? If the Chinese are already in play, they already built their dam, it's already filling up. That was a decade in advance. Same with the new Renaissance dam. Decade in advance, took all these countries to get together because they shared water. There were so many arguments, as you know, there should be. Hey, you're going to steal the water? Well, you know, it's supposed to run down the river, and you're not going to give it to us because you don't agree with this, that, or the other, and then you don't grow enough crops. You know, this is the problem that we're being on the table there. Everywhere you look, this cycle's being front run by a decade of those who know and have reset up or are setting up these areas to have constant electricity through the new precipitation pattern to reset up a city. Because if you got a hydroelectric plant there, you can set up a city from scratch, basically. You just need the initial machines and you can manufacture everything on site. So I don't know, Ransom. I got boggled down there in my mind. So tell me, that was the question. Yeah, how long do you think the onset for a lot of these changes? Because obviously we're seeing a 10-year front run on a lot of changes on the planet. So what do you think we're sitting at?
Well, what is it, about 60 years that those dams are supposed to be built for? Like the lifespan of them, even though they usually let the ones they've built go longer than that. But think about that. If that's the lifespan of the thing, you would think that they were planning on using that within the next 50 years. You know, let me bounce around for a minute. I mean, I think that they are planning at least redundancies for the chance of climate actually changing back to a way that it wasn't for a long time, just by the little plans that they're doing. Like I said, they're trying to bring back ice age animals. They're trying to cordon off where humans can exist. They're cutting the food supplies. It's like they're trying to create the specific situation. And you got to remember, these people think they're the engineers of everything. But to bounce back kind of to this Reshat structure here, you know, when you look at Africa, and that's really cool that your friend got to go there and come on and talk about it. So some of the stuff he was talking about, you know, maybe being ancient aqueducts. If you look at Africa right here, and you can imagine that at one time a massive flood came through here. There's really no doubt. I mean, the evidence is right before your eyes looking at it. But then you got to think about, where would all of these people go that were in here? They would get displaced, right? So they were probably running for the high spots all over the place. They would have had to learn to live there even after the floods, because things would have been massively destroyed. And the only thing that really pops out is this mountain range that's right north of the Reshat, if I could say it right, the Reshat structure, or the Reshat structure, however you say it. What's really cool about this is a little bit to the north of them live the Berber people. Now, the Berber people are an indigenous white peoples that lived in northern Africa, and they have probably all the way back to the Pleistocene. So these would have been people whose ancestors would have been living maybe or possibly here. And the bizarre thing about them is that they say They came from Atlantis. They're one of the few people that have in their oral histories that they actually came from a place called Atlantis. And both of them, the people are several of them. So you also have the, let's see, what are they called? The Bosch people in Spain that have a linguistic style that's not related to any other language that we know of. So none of the other Aryan Indo languages that came out of the Aryan Indus Valley. We can track back all of the languages back to those languages, but you can't do that with either the Basque people or the Berber people. And they're both, indigenous people to where they lived for God knows how long. And both of them have oral histories of coming from a place called Atlantis. Now, whether or not it's the same place that Plato talked about is kind of irrelevant, because what I was, to go back to this, if you look at this Reshat structure, or Reshat structure, whatever you call it, there's this mountain range up here that's just north of it. And this would be the only place that you could possibly set up civilization after a giant flood had come through here. It's one of the few places here. So the idea that there would be ancient remnants of, aqueducts and other stuff isn't very far-fetched, because, I mean, when you just look at the geography of the area, this is really the only mountain range that stands out. And then back to your point about how long do you think it's going to be till, this plan kind of that they're expecting for the age of a new ice age. And like I said, it doesn't actually have to be an ice age per se, where there's giant glaciers covering the continents or anything. It could be just a reformat of the way civilization is spread out across the globe, something to the effect of what was going on in the Pleistocene, or at least they think that. But I wanted to show you this other thing. A minute ago, you were talking about some of the stuff in Turkey, or is it Göbekli Tepe? And there's a place there where you when you look at these structures, you could tell that they were tilting just a little bit each time they built a monument to change. And actually, recently there's been a place in Idaho found like that we hope to get out to. And it shows something similar. These are earthworks that were built, and they tilt just a little bit. You could tell the older ones are not true north and south or east or west. So I don't know if it's that they didn't know because of some other reason. Like, you ever wonder how they based the cardinal directions for an entire planet back then, and knew that they were at true north, like the Great Pyramids or something like that? How did they know exactly which way was exact? But they did, and there's several places around the globe, and Tiwanaku is one of those places in Peru, which is tilted just a little bit, which seems like the Earth at one time, maybe 17,000 years or more, wasn't exactly at a 23.5 degree tilt. And the whole Mason's triangle, and that was another thing I was going to tell you. When you had your guest on and you guys were showing, I think he was calling them forks, and I can't find it. I was looking for it, but it was a clear Mason square and compass design of whatever that was. So I don't know what they found out there, but it was very bizarre that it was literally like a big Mason square and compass, just the design of it. So that was really tripped out, and I was going to find this spot and show them. So what do you think about? Do you think you think the Earth has ever actually tilted at some time? Maybe temporarily for some reason, because a lot of people talk about rogue entities coming through the atmosphere. And right now, actually, I was showing it a minute ago, they're calling it a gigantic alien comet, the one that was kind of doing a nosedive towards the sun. And then the idea that all these comets are popping up, from a long time ago that visited Earth, is that not kind of just another indication that we're going into a time that's reminiscent of something that maybe people in the Pleistocene or even further back to like the fall of the Neanderthal man were living in? And maybe that fits into why they got these weird plans of removing or redesigning where people live. And it seems like from my own visit down to the Yucatan that they're developing that, and that there are plans to put that into some kind of really industrial type area, maybe some of these smart cities or whatever they're planning down there. But it does seem like they're moving out civilization in certain areas so they can move a new civilization in. And not only that, recently when this polar vortex came down, the people down there in the Yucatan when we were visiting were mentioning, that it was about I think 90 degrees, really humid, and they were saying, "Oh, this is nothing. It's like usually 110 and humid here, and it's really hot, and there's no natural water if it doesn't rain there, so it gets pretty uncomfortable." But recently, when we had that big cold blast, there was 50 degrees and 70 degrees down on the Yucatan Peninsula, and if you imagine this being a new weather format, there would be a totally new, different growth zone in these areas, and up further north would become more and more bitterly cold. And another question I got for you, should people that live along the river valleys of different places from California to the middle of the United States maybe plan on holding back their farming to let the flooding happen that's probably going to happen this spring in large amounts, since there's record amounts of snowpack everywhere while they're telling you that the earth is warming. I'm sorry, that was a lot, but I was going to show you these native earthworks that they found in Idaho, and you can clearly see that the orientation has changed over time, where the new ones are at perfect cardinal directions, but the older ones are tilted just a little bit.
It's all about the tilt. And every ancient culture has the same stories of, yes, the earth turning over on itself is the most common way they described it. The sun will rise in a different direction. The sun will rise in a completely opposite direction. Well, the sun will rise in the west instead of the east. That would be nothing tilted, but the earth stopped, something with a magnetic rotation on it, and then it started up again. But when it restarted, it went in a different direction. Oceans would have sloshed, yeah, but not like a full 21 degree or 90 or 45 degree tilt where the whole planet shifts over, because the equator would be in a completely different place. It's not so much about the flood of the water moving and everything. It would be more about where the land subsistence would be and where the new equator would pop out of the middle of the ocean, and then new areas that were above water would suddenly be below just on the centrifugal force. Because if you measure the water at the equator, it's actually bulging out than it is up in the Arctic. So the sea level height at the Arctic and at the equator are different. So just even that shift alone on where new areas would pop out or re-emerge under to, that movie 2012, although you might have liked it or you didn't, at the very end of there, it said the most interesting thing, and this is exactly describing this. Charles Hapgood was the first one to write about it, and then the Adam and Eve story come out. But that movie was before the Adam and Eve story release. Talked about the Drakensberg Mountains being the new largest, tallest mountains in the planet, overtaking the Himalaya. So the Drakensberg would become the new Himalaya. Okay, put that in perspective. Like, that's the new Himalaya mountain. The Himalaya mountains from before are either underwater or, they're significantly lower based on crustal deformation or bending or subsidence. Drakensberg Mountain is now the 30,000 feet peaks across the planet. That's the kind of change they're talking about if the earth turns over on itself. But there's stories of that, survivors, etc. But they always seem to be given information again by some mythical figure with advanced information that arrives by sea. And that's one thing that is pervasive around the world, that after massive cataclysms, there's always somebody that comes back for the survivors to teach them again. And it always seems to be a seafaring type of entity. So I'll leave that for a second. Now, I'm going to have to visually just speak this out to you, and I hope I can describe it for you. There's a few images that I did not use in yesterday's couple of videos because it was late night when I was downloading a lot of stuff. I'd watched a few videos about this workout structure way back, and people hunting for artifacts or buying artifacts from the locals out there. Because apparently there was so much stuff laying around that you could actually go. And locals had collected a bunch of stuff themselves. They weren't selling it. They just collected it, and they were using it around their village in Wadane. And they had curved tables and all kind of crazy things that were carved out of rock. So that's a video for anybody out there to go search. But David Stig Hansen sent me this image here, a couple of images actually. It looks like vendors out in front of where a car would stop or some sort of check post. And on the table in front here, there's arrowheads. When I say arrowheads, I'm talking arrowheads. Some of them have been chipped, like you understand the traditional, hunting bow. Others are flat, but still sculpted so they would cut through. These arrowheads are massive. I mean, the ones we use today are super fractional tiny in comparison to what I'm looking at here. These things are a good 5 to 10 times larger than anything that I've ever seen used for like a hunting arrow on the end of the quiver, whatever. But then next to that, it looks like either somebody faked a bunch of glass to make it look and like rolled it in a roller with a bunch of sand to trying to scuff up the edges, or it's some sort of quartz crystal, but it's not, it's round. And I have not seen this kind. Maybe it's a different kind of crystal, but whatever it is, it doesn't have that crystal shape with the pointed heads on it, would become the 5 point on there. This is perfectly round, or very close to being round as a stone can get, with a few side edges on it. But then there's this one thing right here in the middle that caught my attention. There's a round disc. It looks like it could be, there's no reference on it, so it could be the size of, like a very large button on a coat, or even just a little bit larger. But there's cuneiform text stamped into it. It's a black stone. Normally, cuneiform text is stamped into sort of clay tablets, but this is in it looks like very hard caked, maybe oven-fired black sort of clay stone that they tapped a bunch of Sumerian characters into that. Right on the table there. The other stuff's pretty cool. And there's probably like 5 ladies there. So, looking at some of the bowls and things that they've sculpted out of rock there, which is pretty interesting. A lot of it obviously looks more, let's say, modern. But I'm sure through there are an enormous amount. Now, it doesn't have to be from the Rakat structure, but just think about the massive amounts of civilization. If you had a wave roll over North America, and then part of North America went higher in the air, part of it went lower underwater, altitude increased in parts, turned into a desert. Like if the entire east coast of the United States turned into the most massive desert like the Gobi Desert, or like the Sahara Desert, what would you find here 12,000 years later, 8,000 years later? Do that experiment. Raise it in altitude, shake everything off the crust, take all the vegetation away and turn it into a desert over 12,000 years. And then what would be left of New York City? What would be left of Philadelphia or Washington? Anywhere these cities that you might think big ones. What would happen to the lakes? The Great Lakes would dry out. Especially if there's altitude change and it poured out of the lakes versus draining into the lakes. Rivers would crack in the crust and they'd pour into the crust, literally into the crust, and then downriver it would just dry out one day. So the stories are fascinating for me anyway, of people actually selling things that they just found while they were out with the goats. Like maybe their husband's a herder and they go out and they just find stuff and bring it back. And they would sell it. And this is what I'm seeing is one of these setups here, blowing my mind. Like I never thought you would actually see that. And and you sent me these photos, and I'm like, that's the sort of same thing that was coming out of some of these, just not documentaries, but just somebody on their own doing a travel video that was buying some or looking for some of these artifacts, but then also talking to the families who had found this stuff for multi-generations across the Rakat structure in areas which would have been the seacoast. And some of those bluffs that look like Grand Canyon sculpting, that would have been the sea. I went around the map for a minute and go, all right, if you were going to sail in by sea, where would the ports be? Well above 400 feet above where the Rakat structure is. You got to think about land subsistence and rebounding and sort of thing. Isostatic rebound, I think Stig called it. But anyway, I lost my point there. But, to look at some of these images and see these artifacts, and if they're not real, if they're fakes, somebody took an enormous amount of time to do this, because that is stone that is being chipped away. None of it looks machined to me. But again, China, they could do a lot of stuff to make it look the way it looks, natural and whatnot. But for me, I'm looking at a table of things that were literally found out in the sand here that are now for sale because somebody was coming to town to buy a bottle of water, that kind of thing. And it's the most fascinating images to look at close. You know what? I'm going to send this image to you, if you don't mind. If you could put it on screen for me here, Ransom, let me send that to you. Can you please take over? I'm just rambling now.
Oh yeah, there was something else I was going to point out. When you had your guest on, he's in the MIAC chat room there, David. You guys were looking at this big long line of rock that was like almost perfectly straight. And the only time I've ever seen something like that is at Shiprock. If you look at Shiprock, it has these three perfectly straight lines that come out from it, right? And let me download.
Are you talking about Australia?
No, I was talking about when you guys were you had your guest on looking at the Reshat structure. You guys showed these big long straight lines that look like they were made out of rock.
Yeah, where's the other place you're talking about that was the equivalent of that one?
The only time, what I was saying is the only time I've ever seen that is at Shiprock. If you look at Shiprock, there's these three straight, perfect rock lines that come out from it.
Yeah, but where
and
is that?
You know how?
Where is that place? Where is that Shiprock?
Shiprock's in New Mexico.
See,
it's,
all right, I didn't know that. I really didn't. I'm asking because I didn't know it.
Yeah, it looks like a giant lightning strike, kind of. If you've ever seen the little experiments where they zap the electricity on the steel and then it leaves this little peak and valleys around it, right? Like straight canals and different stuff. I don't know. It just made me think of that anyway. Here, let me load these pictures.
Lichtenberg's figures is what those are called. Lightning strike. Fulgurites are also the below ground formation with the electrical interaction as that lightning bolt or plasma hits the ground, it discharges, and it creates these hollow, what look like ant tunnels for a better term, and they're called fulgurites. Now, on a mild lightning strike, you don't want to get hit by the thing, but it'll leave a little tiny one. Huge giant lightning strike still leaves some that are sort of an inch deep or something, a couple inches. But the one that you're looking at here is like half a mile deep, like crazy orders of magnitude different. So what do you see in the thing there? Those obviously look like chipped arrowheads to me, and it's just random how people are out there. That looks like about 5.
Well, that's a lot of artifacts.
Are selling it. Are you seeing those images?
Yeah, I'm showing the one where you have a lot of artifacts lined up.
Yeah, so what do you think? Like, walk me through. What do you see there? Okay, so if I just said, these were taken from the middle of the Sahara Desert on an ancient city that was lost to time. They just dug them out of the sand, and they're not really museum quality, but they're still from the same place, super ancient relics. What would you say?
Yeah, they look like Pleistocene tips there, and
right, yeah, last ice age tips, but bigger,
and some rock axes there. Yeah, what's these? Is that those little? I forgot what you call that. It's the vitrified sand there.
And yeah, I'm not familiar with that.
Well, it's just like when lightning strikes sand and it makes glass, but there's a couple of spots in the Sahara where it looks like maybe a meteorite or even a nuke in the past. I wouldn't even rule that out. And it makes that weird glass. Sometimes it's yellow, but this one's like, sometimes it's green, but this one's yellow. I can see there's like 4 or 5 pieces of that. It's like clear rock. That would have had to have been super heated right there. I mean, so I could see why they were pulling that out of the sand there. But the rest of that looks like Pleistocene axes and arrowheads.
And that fulgurite might be to the left there, that thing that looks like a tube that's broken a little bit. That may be where a plasma bolt hit the planet and then, channeled down through the crust and put all those minerals together there. It's too snake-like. It's exactly like a fulgurite. I didn't even think about that. That's exactly what it looks like, but it should be hollow. That's the problem. If it's a fulgurite, it should be hollow.
Right. One thing that stands out to me about those tips is they're different than like Folsom or Clovis, where they don't have a flute. You see that? which
Yeah, I see
probably
that
means
very
that they're
smooth
pretty
honey arrow
old.
when they're in the front with the flute on that.
I see the ridges on that one there. Yeah, those are cool. And then this other picture that you sent me just shows the amount of artifacts they're yanking out of the sand there.
It's crazy amount, dude. They're just pulling up pre-ice or pre-exit out of the pre-Younger Dryas artifacts, or just laying in everybody's backyard.
Yeah, those stones kind of look like amber, possibly. I don't know
Well,
what
you
they
think
are,
so?
but yeah.
Yeah, you're right. I've heard about the glass being formed after some sort of superheating events in the. That's a legend. India's full of that too, like battles from the sky,
Yeah,
and
like
then, referencing planetary lightning discharges, and then glass being there.
like Mohenjo-Daro, where they got all of the blocks vitrified on the side there. No one wants to really talk about that one. I always thought that's bizarre. You have ancient tales of these Vimanas and guys flying around with these really massive weapons they're using on each other, and then this city that's supposed to be mythological, there it is. Hey, wow. And it has evidence of some weird stuff going on, like melted stone. You got radioactive bodies just laying where they were. It's not like they left or anything. They're still sitting there. There's no evidence of like animals eating the bodies. So that's another weird thing. It kind of, something was wrong with the people that were there, or the animal life was dead too. I mean, and then they got all of these cities that are just slightly off the coast, right? When this great flood happened, it just buried all these cities. And then you got places like this. But like I said, this whole area right there, the Rashat structure, just imagine this massive wall of water, or multiple floods, because there's theories that whatever happened, probably the impact zones along the Carolina Bays or whatever, would have triggered part of the continental shelf under the ocean to just slip off, causing an additional tsunami that would have bounced around, Europe, Africa, South America, and North America, and just kind of bounced off of each other, and then went back to the other side and hit again with another tsunami, like repeatedly. So you would have had massive flooding from the initial impact, and then you would have had substantial amounts of tsunamis that followed that, because the flooding pushing all of the soil off into the ocean, right? You imagine the amount of tsunami that was coming off of the Horn of Africa right there, with the amounts of sand you see blowing across there. And the ice structure is really the only big mountain that's out there. So if there were any survivors or people that were living in those times afterwards, they would have probably most likely had to have been living on top of that, or right around there.
Splish splash, I was taking a bath. Yeah. Oh, Stig, I got a personal message here. Dude, you could have paid for your trip and made money had you just bought those arrowheads, the glass, and the fulgurite on the table there, plus a couple of the axe heads, and brought it back. You'd have paid for your trip just buying the rocks on the table, my man. I'm thinking something like that. Damn, that's crazy. You found, you got all that ready. Because I'd seen somebody going out there looking, and the artifacts that they showed on some of these videos off of YouTube and different platforms, obviously, was like orders 100x, way 100x at least on what you're seeing in any of these photos of what were taken out there for people traveling through the area to buy. I mean, these were the most exquisite, and you talk about ringing rocks like Michael Tellinger. These things were sculpted, and it's almost really unfathomable almost how what I saw in these people living there in Wadane that have all these artifacts. Something that is so mind-blowing that would be one of the top pieces in a museum is just somebody's headrest or somebody's sitting stool made out of rock that's nearly impossible to carve in today's perspective.
Is that a spear to the right in this picture?
Yeah, that has the cuneiform text on it, but it's a different kind of black clay versus the usual gray and kind of yellowish clay. But you can see cuneiform right in there. Definitely 100% that's cuneiform writing in that circular black clay hardened disc there.
Wow. Well, over there to the right in this picture, there's what looks like
that big spear.
I don't. not a Roman spear, but some kind of old spear. Yeah.
Yeah, that's not normal. Like rock is hard to form and keep at that kind of really long piece. You know what I mean? Like rocks mostly would break by the time they're a foot long and shaped like a spear. A rock's going to pretty much break in nature if it's a foot and a half long and shaped like a spear or a long knife. It's going to break somewhere. But look at that thing. Well, I hope you can see what we're seeing on the screen here. And allow your mind to go back into the past and see, you know, how vast was the society and civilization at that point if they're leaving that much around. And we may think that it was only hunter-gatherer, but that coexisted with something far more high-tech. Or perhaps these were the survivors that reverted back to the basics because the high-tech disappeared. And we're just seeing what the survivors had churned up after a few years of living after the flood, or a few decades or a few centuries. You know, something survived through that time and brought the knowledge back. It's encoded in the star maps, it's encoded in the temples, it's encoded in the megaliths. Look this direction and use your computer software to reel back the stars anywhere from 2,000 to 6,000, 8,000, 12,000, 15,000 years. Thanks for playing. We're leaving you a message. This is going to happen when this star comes right through the center of this column. In the precession of the equinoxes, your planet gets knocked back to the Stone Age. So get ready for it, and we're marking it in time. And, you know, you rulers on the planet, you still have 2,000 years, and it's okay. You're not going to sweat it. But when it comes to this point now where we enter the age of Aquarius, everything's marking back to the exact same star maps and the exact same temple door positions that we had when the Cataclysm came 12,500 years ago. Stick them up.
Thank you for listening to Revolution.